We're going to get into the economy, talking about funds. And Rand Paul making some news going to Fort Knox. Is it performative? Well, maybe not. Let's get into a little bit on the U.S. economy now, everybody. Hassett and other Trump lackeys took time to deflect away from the unemployment statistics that we mentioned on Friday. That's right. A few months ago, Hassett said the economy was on the rise. Remember that? Then 2 weeks later, he said it would be improving. Then Kevin Hassett started to recognize the reality that viewers weren't swallowing his swill. So, of course, now he blames, you got it, Repo Man, the previous administration. Please get this Cheshire Cat out of the political trees.
So while you lay out that data, and it's promising and it sounds good for the future, people right now do not feel the benefits of that just yet. And so our polling also shows us this, that when we're asked folks which political party will do a better job, they give a 9-point advantage to Democrats on the economy, 10 points on inflation and prices, 22-point advantage on income equality, which is something we hear a lot about on the campaign trail. So I hear you acknowledging that there is an issue, but listen, we're weeks away from early voting starting in some states. Do you think there needs to be more of a message of empathy? We understand that you are struggling out there versus saying it's great, you just haven't felt it yet.
You're right, but people absolutely are feeling legitimate problems when they go to the grocery store, which are problems that were created because of the runaway inflation of the previous administration. But the bottom line.
Okay. It's just, you know what he's going to say. It's like they might as well just put a cardboard thing up there and just have somebody like putting little bubbles coming out from different sides of them. Previous administration, things are going to get better. Oh, don't listen to what I said last week. What's that? Squirrel. I mean, it's just, they must really think people are dumb. They just treat people like children. Then we got this from Jake Tapper with Hassett about June. Not June Cleaver. Tapper, you said in June this was the strongest job market in your lifetime. By what metric? Remember Friday we mentioned how they had to reduce the job numbers dramatically for everything?
The economy, according to BLS, lost 23,000 jobs in July, when economists were expecting a 95,000 job gain. The job creation you boasted about for the previous 2 months, unfortunately, those numbers were also sharply revised down. It turns out 100,000 jobs were not created in May and June. You said in June that this was, quote, the strongest job market in your lifetime. By what metric?
Yeah, I think that one of the things we're seeing is that these jobs numbers are getting revised left and right. You can remember over the last couple of years, there were millions of revisions. And the bottom line is that if you look at the overall economy, then things are really, really booming. As an example, there are 83,000 construction workers building factories.
So what Tapper does is talk about the overall economy. Then Hassett comes out and says, well, Jake, if you stop doing what you're doing and you look at the overall economy, let me focus on a couple things. Let me selectively pull out something that I will depict as the overall economy when you just friggin' talked about the overall economy. This is so insane. It's so insulting.
Right now, that's a number that we've never seen before. Initial claims for unemployment insurance are the lowest they've been since World War II. There are more job openings than there are unemployed workers.
The reason that new jobless claims are not as high as they might have been previously is because so many people have left the job market, especially boomers who are saying it's not worth looking anymore. Does anybody have a friggin' clue? Look at Tapper. Tapper at least you can tell he's not buying any of this crap. The problem with Tapper is that if Hassett were a Democrat, he'd be nodding and letting him get away with it. Yeah, well, we got construction jobs are going up there for ice cream shops. So, I don't know what you're talking about. And again, more than once, he does this to blame Joe Biden. The people in the administration are pushing to blame Joe Biden for the terrible Trump economy and towering unemployment numbers. And of course, he never bothered to address the fact that the Bureau of Labor Statistics repeatedly lies about the unemployment numbers. He never talked about that, did he? Never really. Well, you know, we had a lot of different revisions, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, how about these revisions that we're talking about now? You don't have to repeat what I just said. You could address the fact that they were revised downwards. Unbelievable. And then Hassett. Well, yeah, we're going to talk some polling here from CNBC. Polling indicates that Americans feel an inflation problem. No, really? They're feeling costs go up. How do you address that? Well, Joe Biden.
The core year on year is 2.6%. And if you look at it that way, and I guess it's all matter how you look at the data, you could say that you could make the case that that shows that there's persistent underlying inflation. And for the average.
Now, remember, everybody, core consumer price doesn't include food or gas. That's core.
American out there, I mean, polling indicates that they feel an inflation problem, that they are feeling the costs go up in housing and medical expenses, dining out in the last CPI report. I mean, how do you address that? I mean, you can point to all the numbers you want in the economic data. I don't know if it's a perception problem, but that's what they're feeling out there.
Right. Well, absolutely. You know, we understand what people are feeling, and in part it came about because of the runaway inflation under Joe Biden. Inflation has decelerated a lot, but it's
unbelievable. No, it hasn't decelerated a lot. It hasn't decelerated at all. What a bunch of, where are the pitchforks, right? And then I've got this, as I mentioned here, we got NEC director Kevin Hassett, and I commented on this myself. I said, when people are long-term unemployed, the ratio of first-time unemployed filing for insurance can be made to appear like it's a rainbow of beauty. Hassett is very bad at deceit. So he says, if you look at the overall economy.
Yeah, I think that one of the things we're seeing is that these jobs numbers are getting revised left and right. You can remember over the last couple of years, there were millions of revisions.
And we heard that. Yeah. 83,000 construction workers building factories right now. And of course, as we know, there's an easy way to try to make it look like the economy is booming. George W. Bush wanted that in early 2002, which is why a few years later, I wrote that article for the Mises Institute trying to warn people there was going to be a crash. Oh, man. Because you get malinvestment. It goes into stuff with the expectation that's going to be more purchasing, and then the purchasing power goes down as the prices are bid up. People stop their purchasing, and things retract, and you've got to liquidate everything that's been bid up. Congressman Rudy Yakum blamed Biden for economic woes 18 months now into Trump's second term. Yakum states President Trump, quote, was certainly left with a mess to clean up, while the segment displays current stats, including 3.5% inflation, $4.04 per gallon gas, and 1.5% gross domestic product growth, way outstripped by inflation. The interview also features RNC Chair Joe Gruters asserting that Trump is fixing Biden's economy, highlighting ongoing Republican messaging. So whether it's all Biden's economy or it's, well, those Iranians can't be trusted to negotiate, it's all the same. It's just a perverse mental pathology. Here we go. Here's Rudy.
Let me play some more sound from you. As I mentioned off the top there, RNC Chair Joe Gruters was just on The Hill Sunday. And here's how he framed the current economic situation. Take a listen.
This is certainly Biden's prices that we're still dealing with and we're still getting under control. This president.
So is it the Biden economy then? I mean, if it's Biden's prices.
It's Biden's disastrous economic record. This president, the working family tax cuts, no tax on tips and overtime, has had a big impact across this country. He's been working at $19 trillion worth of investments that you're not going to see right away.
Congressman, do you think that's a winning message to just say it's not our fault? And 18 months in, is it not Trump's economy yet?
President Trump was certainly left with a mess to clean up. But when you're left with a mess, what you do is you roll up your sleeves and you go to work. And that's what President Trump has been doing since day one. That's what House Republicans have been doing, working with President Trump. We just do what we do in the Hoosier State. We roll up our sleeves, we go to work, and you'll find.
So stupid. So stupid. So here's a great way to lower prices for people. Increase taxes the most in 70 years through tariffs. That's a brilliant way to do it. That really frees up usable liquidity to invest in new businesses to employ more people. That's great. And then you know what else you can do? You can send hundreds of billions of dollars to Israel, to Ukraine, and to a war that isn't a war in Iran. Then you can lock up the Persian Gulf as the people you're attacking respond, and then their allies can lock up the Red Sea, and then you can blame them. And Americans can roll up their sleeves a little more. I don't know how much higher the sleeves can roll, buddy, but it gets a little bit frustrating when you're not dealing with reality, and everybody I know knows reality. The emperor has no clothes. I would just like one of these people to just, on News Nation, regardless of their job, just to say, you know what, dude, stop saying such crap. We got another 30 seconds. You want to clean this up before we go to commercial? I'm not going to be back after the commercial break. Why don't you say the truth? Thanks. Take care. Jeez. Have some free. I mean, she wasn't bad. She wasn't bad. Now, let me show you this. There's some key statistics here, okay? We've got the fascistic stuff about Intel. Hassett immediately changes the topic when this person asks him about how much longer do you think the investment should happen in things like Intel, fascism? And Hassett's like,
we've been speaking headlines just crossed by a company that actually the taxpayers have a big stake in, which is Intel. Which has just announced a plan to offer $15 billion in common stock offering to raise money. My question to you actually is, how long do you imagine that taxpayers and the government should or should not be invested in Intel? If you recall, when we bailed out, for example, General Motors, it was for a period of time, the banks similarly. This has been quite, by the way, an investment, meaning it has worked as an investment on behalf of the taxpayers. Sure. But the question then becomes, should you exit on behalf of the taxpayers?
All right, so it hasn't worked. None of it ever works because you have nothing to which you can compare it. This is the problem that happened in Japan. They can claim that putting a bunch of money into a government project sees some positive growth for that project, and then you have a window for which they will measure it. But then after that window closes, they might not follow up, like a lot of the people who were involved with the Japanese debacle with the chip investment didn't do. But if you're watching things long term with an eye on economics, you'll want to see. And then, regardless of what happens for that particular company, just like tariffs, it never is helpful, because you're not allowing the people who earned the money themselves, who had it taken to give to Intel, to determine what's helpful for them. So you can never say that this has been economically successful, because you don't know the trade-offs that those people were forced to sacrifice. You can't say it was successful. It's possible that every one of the people who had their taxes taken from them to invest in Intel could have invested in something else that would have been 8,000 times more productive than Intel. You don't know because you haven't allowed them to be, what's that word? Oh, that's right, free. Free. Freedom. What an odd term nowadays, isn't it? Now, here's Steve Ratner. Steve Ratner, I used to, every week I would welcome Ellen Ratner, his sister, on my program. And she would give me information that from her left-wing perspective from Washington when I did my New Hampshire show. But he's got this. And I said, while I disagree with Steve Ratner's claim that the Biden employment atmosphere was strong, unless one calls it strong because the atmosphere stank like manure, the economy has gotten much worse due to Trump's tariffs, added spending, and expansion of military attacks. And by the way, some of the people who are claiming that Donald Trump has slightly better inflation numbers, they're basically the same. But one of the key things, and what's his name, the Raging Cajun, who's now ill, who worked with Clinton, he did the same thing in his book, We're Right, They're Wrong, James Carville. And the Trump people are doing it too. They're including the inflation numbers from January of last year. Trump had nothing to do with those. That was policy that came from the previous Congress and from the Biden administration. In fact, even through most of the first year of the Trump administration, the budget and so on and so forth, that was all based on stuff that was done under Biden with that other Congress. So those first few months, especially that first month, you can't attribute anything other than consumer sentiment in some cases to a different president for that first month when the president comes in. He's not even sworn in until a few weeks in, right? But they're doing the same thing that the Carville book did when Carville claimed that Clinton's economy was really great in his first term. They include the last month of the previous administration and say that that somehow has something to do with the policies of that new president when the president wasn't even in office. It's so deceptive. That's James Carville for you. And so this is what Steve Ratner's got to say, though. This is, I think, valuable. And I'm going to blow this up a little bit so you can see it a little better. Because the gray is, of course, the Biden time, and then the red is the Trump time. So you can see the last month of Biden was pretty bad as far as monthly job growth, right? But you can see Trump, generally speaking, almost entirely worse. And you can see the trend lines. And those things, those speak volumes. So, yeah, amazing. Now, to round things off, I want to give you this, because this is key. Now, this is regular CPI, not core, okay? So this includes food inflation. Food prices rose faster than the average of all other goods and services throughout this January 2021 through June 2026 window, which is why the food lines sit slightly above the overall CPI line. So you can see food is in the light blue, 31.7% between 21 and 2026. Higher prices, 31.7%. Again, it's functional additive equation compounded. And then the CPI, this is not core, this is CPI that includes food and gas, is 26.6% between 2021 and now. And finally, Rand Paul visited Fort Knox today. Is it a stunt? It certainly won't change the monetary system, which is key for inventing monetary units to fund war and domestic fascism. So you can think logically, they're never going to stop it. But it might be educational regarding central banking. And as I noted here, American citizens wouldn't have to wonder about this if they were free to use the money they wanted, issued from competitive private interests, private banks. And I know a lot of people say, well, you know, the Federal Reserve, it's not federal and it doesn't have any reserves. Again, the lesson is to separate the polis from the monetary system. It doesn't matter whether it's a central treasury and it's done by the government or the government hands it off to a corporate monopoly board like the Federal Reserve. It doesn't make a difference. The government incentivizes, whether they did it under the First Bank of the United States, which they did, or they even did it under the Bank of North America during the Continental Congress years. They inflate the currency. They have an incentive to do it, and they will not keep enough reserves in their stores to actually issue a 1-to-1 ratio. They'll issue it on fractional. And that, unless they explicitly tell you, that's fraud. because if you go to redeem your redemption slip and they can't redeem it, they've defrauded you. Now, it's possible that in some sort of dream world, it's possible that you could have banks that tell you, okay, look, we're going to keep this amount of gold in store. We're going to issue 2 times that amount in paper. But we are also going to be charging interest or a fee for people who want to keep their stuff with us. And we are going to be loaning out in addition to that. And those loans, we're going to be very careful. We're going to count those as assets. And so if we do have a run, we're going to be able to liquidate some of our assets so that you can get your money. Now, I wouldn't go to that bank, but maybe some people would. They'll say, yeah, you know what? Okay, fine. I'll be basically a proxy investor in what you think are really good, sound loans that you'll give to businesses and homeowners. Okay, fine. I'll back that up for you. So even though it's fractional reserve regarding the precious metals, you've got other claimed assets. Okay, fine. And that's the banking system we have now because it's backdropped by the FDIC. So they ridiculously hand out all sorts of loans to people they shouldn't. And it's backdropped by the Federal Reserve. They're always coming to the rescue. That's the problem. And then every time they put out a loan, they count that as a real asset, which expands the money supply because they loan off of that. It's exponential. It's not even geometric. It's exponential. It just depends on what the reserve requirement is. And now that reserve requirement, by the way, is zero. Zero. So here's Rand. He's going into Fort Knox.
Fort Knox, we've come to see the gold. Our country has about 147 million ounces of gold, and about half of it is stored here at Fort Knox. We're going to be going deep underground to see the gold. But more importantly, we're going to be talking today about what happened to our dollar when we separated from gold in 1971. Over 85% of the value of the dollar has been lost since we delinked from gold. So there is a problem. The media now calls this affordability. But what it really is inflation. We run a debt. As the deficit runs up, $2 trillion a year. Part of that debt is bought by the Federal Reserve with newly created dollars. This leads to inflation and prices are up. And my goodness, just go to the grocery store, still look at the price of meat. Prices are up 25% in the last 5 years. It's inflation. It's related to deficit spending. It's related to unbalanced budgets. So we're going to look at the gold today. But really what we're talking about is why is our paper currency failing us? And why does our country continue to run such massive debts? I'm going down underground and I'll let you know what I see in a little bit. Thanks.
Thanks, Rand. Well, he's got some reportage that he's offering. And I also want to mention this, again, to reiterate, as we noted last week, stocks are highly overpriced. So here is the bar chart. Stock market hits second most expensive valuation in history, far surpassing the crash of 1929 and only slightly behind the dot-com bubble. Actually, it's over the dot-com bubble. Again, if you go to 2007, you'll see that the price-earnings ratio is higher now than it was in 2007. That's on the New York Stock Exchange. And as we mentioned, the Japanese yen continues to collapse despite significant intervention from the Bank of Japan and the U.S. Treasury. The yen continues to weaken and is nearing another breach of the 159 yen per U.S. dollar mark. So I'm sorry to have to give you all this terrible news. I want to give you one final bit, okay, before we go. As all of this is happening, and Rand Paul mentions beef prices, what is Brooke Rollins doing? This would be the Interior Secretary. She's stopping foreign cattle, as she says, you know, those evil migrant cows. Dumb waiters, dumb this. Part of the mental pathology here centers on their love of stopping foreign food products. We, dumb consumers, cannot have any choice. So it sure is good that she's there to protect us. Brooke Rollins, Aaron Rupar writes, said the border wall is needed to keep illicit cattle out.
And if you'll introduce yourself.
Sandra Sanchez, XR Media CBS 4 and Reporter Report. Good morning, Madam Secretary.
Good morning.
You mentioned illicit cattle movement by cartel. Is that happening on this part of the border? Perhaps Commissioner Scott can also address what are you doing to stop that? How active is that, and how do drones and this whole support tie into that?
No, yes, and I'll have a couple things to say on that. Dudley, I don't know if you want to offer additional, or Admiral Schmoyer. That is one thing that we have been tracking very closely, is that illicit cattle. To date, we don't know of one case that has crossed the border into America. We just know that it is a real possibility. And as we're opening the port in Douglas, Arizona, now probably 2 or 3 weeks away, and then a month after that, one of the New Mexico ports, and then the month after that, if everything goes well, the additional New Mexico port, that now opens the aperture for that potential of illicit cattle movement. I've got an Arizona Ranger here with me.
Welcome to the police state. Again, when I lived in Vancouver working at the Outer Limits, I would hear these reports about the great heroic Royal Canadian Mounted Police stopping illicit cigarettes from coming up from the United States because they had such a high tax on smokes. Oh, they stopped the truck with the cigs. How about not putting an added burden on the guy who lives across the street from me to pay for a police force that's stopping willing buyers from meeting willing sellers? And then if people are worried about the cows and whether or not they carry diseases, well, how about we don't further centralize things and overlook the fact that you've already centralized the meat processing system, something that Thomas Massey's been trying to fix for a long time, and something that the federal government should have nothing to do with, to leave a preposition dangling. Take all the meat, put it in just a handful of federally licensed processors, and what do you get? You get a few cows. Now, if they're sick, they're poisoning a much larger pool of meat. If you can allow farmers to slaughter locally and sell locally, you decentralize the system, Ms. Rollins. And amazingly, not as many people are put at risk. I know, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's almost like F.A. Hayek ran across that 70 years ago and won the Nobel Prize for it. It's fairly obvious. I figured that one out when I was 12. You mean the larger the area of control, the more people are going to get hurt by bad decisions? Well, that makes a lot of sense. It's astounding. And you know, it's all PR. It's all rely on the authority, all that stuff. And it's all the trust the science, trust the border science. Go ahead. I'm sure they'll make all the right decisions. Everything will be just hunky-dory. Everything will be great. Trust the bankers. Trust the banking science. Trust the national security science. They know better than you. You can't decide for yourself what makes you secure. They'll decide. And according to them, what makes you secure is exterminating Palestinians, killing babies, destroying cancer wards in Yemen. That keeps you safe. Final thing I want to mention to you before we close up, I want to go back up to some of the Russia-Ukraine stuff. There's something that is big, and I want to go to the UN story to round this off with some of the international stuff, okay? Venezuela, they're not making the money they thought they were going to make on the oil. And then there's a big Greenland story. In fact, let me give you this on the Greenland story real quick. I'll do this. This is a fairly big one, okay? Check this out. There's Russia, Ukraine. Yes, the EU, even though they said next year they're going to prohibit purchases of Russian liquefied natural gas, they're racing to get as much of it right now as they can. But let me give you this Greenland thing, because you might have seen this story, and I was able to do more research today, again, around lunchtime. And I found out a nuance to this that I think is rather interesting. It still doesn't excuse the corruption and the central planning and stuff, but let me give you the information. If you've heard of this company called Greenland Energy, it's not a Greenland-based company. And you might have seen some of the people who've been putting out some of these X feed posts and things like that. For example, a Trump-linked oil firm has showed up in Greenland with all of their equipment to try and drill for oil. This is from Susie Rizzio. And she makes a great point. Absolutely. I'm not detracting from any of this stuff. And I'm going to show you this in a minute. Okay. But I want to go back here because I want to give you some of this fundamental information. Greenland Energy, a Texas oil company chaired by Larry Sweats with Trump Circle ties, landing drilling equipment in Greenland's eastern coast without required approvals, and has led to a strong warning from Greenland's government over the unpermitted operation in Jameson Land. The company partnered with a British license holder, and it aims to explore for potentially massive oil reserves estimated at up to $1 trillion in value, and plans further equipment shipment in September this year, despite Greenland's 2021 moratorium against new oil licenses due to environmental concerns. So you see the way they sneak this in. They tied themselves to a British license holder. Greenland Energy has several documented connections to people in or near President Trump's political and business orbit, primarily through investors, board members, media partners, and associates, though the company and its leadership deny any link to annexation efforts. Now, here is the article from The Guardian, License to Drill, James Bond. How a Trump-linked Texas oil company is elbowing its way into Greenland. On the 10th of June, a snowy-haired American in his 60s addressed the residents of a remote Greenland hamlet. He was there to tell them about a business venture supported by figures linked to Donald Trump. So, Robert Price said via an interpreter, we have a project to drill for oil here. The Texas oil company that Price represents, Greenland Energy, hopes to prove that billions of barrels of crude lie underground by bringing in 300 shipping containers of drilling kit. That's just the start. Let me give you some more to tell you about some of these people. Because as I noted, there's a bit of history here and those ties to Trump. First, the ties to Trump, then the history. The key ties to Trump. And here's another article, NewsGuard. Oh, look. Greenland hits Trump-linked oil firm with strong warning as company lands drilling equipment. So they've already brought a lot of the equipment there. They think they're going to get $1 trillion in crude oil. Larry Sweats Jr., executive chairman and major shareholder. Media reports note that social media posts by his wife show she visited Trump's Mar-a-Lago in 2026. Does that mean anything? Well, here's more. Sweats has been described as having access to Trump's circle. He is also a business partner in another venture with billionaire Paolo Tiramani, a donor who contributed $10 million toward a White House ballroom project. The company retained Rubenstein Public Relations, whose principal has long-standing professional ties to the Trump family, including work with pre-POTUS Trump. Sweats has stated the oil project is not related to American annexation. Really? That comes from the Guardian piece. Kenneth Griffin, Citadel founder and Wall Street billionaire. He acquired roughly a 9% stake in Greenland Energy in April. Griffin is a major Republican donor who contributed $1 million toward Trump's second inauguration. Again, that's from that Guardian piece. Carol Craig, appointed to the company's board of directors in June. She is a U.S. Navy veteran and the founder, CEO of Sidus Space, that's SS if you're listening in audio, a defense and space technology firm involved in work related to the Trump administration's Golden Dome missile defense initiative. Trump has publicly described control of Greenland as, quote, vital to Golden Dome, citing the existing U.S. base in Pitifuk. Then there's Dr. Phil. Yes, that Dr. Phil. Greenland Energy partnered with Dr. Phil McGraw's Envoy Media Company for a planned documentary series called Arctic Wildcatters about the Jameson Land Exploration Project. Phil McGraw previously served on a Trump-appointed Religious Freedom Liberty Commission, and he's publicly supported Trump, spoken at a 2024 rally, and appeared with him. Additional context includes public comments by Jeff Landry, Louisiana governor and Trump's special envoy to Greenland, who has discussed the territory's oil potential and met with project figures, as well as reports of some shareholders discussing a potential Trump pump, a stock boost from a presidential endorsement. So now we're going to go to that Susie Rizzo post. Here we go.
Greenland, as a Trump-linked oil company, an American oil company, has landed drilling equipment on the shores of Greenland without the permission of the government there and without the permission of Denmark. And they are now sounding the alarm. Greenland has issued a strong warning as this Trump-linked oil firm prepares to drill without their permission. It was just a couple days ago Trump reissued this threat to Greenland, and now this is happening. And this is with this company, Greenland Energy. It's a Texas company that was set up just last year, and they have claimed that 1 trillion of crude oil may lie beneath the Jameson Land region in Greenland. And they announced plans to spend $60 million drilling 2 wells to find out, but they haven't gotten permission to do that yet. Greenland Energy Chair Larry Sweats, who enjoys access to the president, said this has nothing to do with American annexation. This is a pretty wild story. Even Dr. Phil has been tapped to film a documentary about this oil drilling project in Greenland. Guys, it just never ends. It gets more and more bizarre each day. What the hell is going on here? Was this just them getting eager and moving equipment on before they actually had permission? It was only spotted by the few sparsely populated people that live there, seeing oil rigs and equipment being brought on shore. So had they not seen it, I don't know if anyone would have known about this. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. Like, share, spread the word, follow along for more, and I'll see you back.
Yeah, good stuff. Appreciate that. And I want to give you a little bit more context here. It's amazing. I just saw Brooke Rollins again talking about stopping those evil cattle from crossing the border. In the meantime, her administration is invading Greenland and attacking Iran. And I said, these links are based on reporting from outlets such as The Guardian, company announcements, and related coverage. There's no indication that Trump or administration officials directly own, control, or formally appoint people to the company itself. Greenland Energy was formed in 2025 via a merger involving Texas-based entities and holds or is earning into existing exploration licenses in Jameson Land that predate Greenland's 2021 halt on new oil licenses. So this is how they think they're going to get away with it, by combining with that British company. Company executives have emphasized the commercial nature of the project independent of geopolitical ambitions. So there's RT on that as well. RT's got a good piece. So I'll just leave it at that, everybody. And hopefully it's been interesting for you. That was quite interesting. And I can only imagine, you know, living in an area and in a community and all of a sudden seeing, you know, like the Viking longships coming up, like, whoa, what's that? Not cool.